You're listening to PPRNradio.net. You may take a break. Not us. We never take a break. We're always on. PPRNradio.net. Music 24/7.
I caught you knocking at my cellar door. I love you, baby, can I have some more? Ooh, the damage done. I hit the city and I lost my band. I watched the needle take another man.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Open Source Radio. This is Dr. Mark Bono, Open Source Recovery Radio, I should say. This is Dr. Mark Bono, your host, and I have guests and co-hosts to entertain you this evening and inform you, and we'll get to that. And I realize that I open the show up every week, and I sometimes fail to promote my own practice, which I should make shameless plugs since I am the host of the show, right? Everyone's agreeing. So just to make sure that people are aware of the resource that is available through the practice that I am a co-owner of. In Madison, Connecticut, we have a practice that specializes in treating opiate addiction, and we have medication-assisted therapy in the truest sense of the word, with therapy provided by yours truly, as well as another psychologist, and and we also have some fine physicians providing medication, and we do that in a very collaborative, close proximity kind of situation over there. We also try and I think succeed pretty well at providing integrated care for people who have mental health issues as well. So the office is warm, inviting, and compassionate, as the title of the practice indicates. And the good news, if you're listening and you have state health insurance and you're looking for somewhere to go, yes, we do take state health insurance, and yes, we can get you in almost immediately. And yes, we are taking new clients. And there's one of them now. We got a caller calling in. Hey, caller. Who we got on the line there? Hello?
Hey, everybody.
Hey, who are we speaking to?
I think it's Jackie.
That's Jackie. Jackie with the flu calling in as a dedicated co-host. Thanks, Jackie. How you feeling? Not so good?
Yeah, I was going to come in, but I was like, I felt selfish of me. So I was like, let me not spread the germs.
Well,
so yes.
But you're here in spirit and voice, so that's what counts. So feel free as we get into the show, Jackie. We're gonna just pretend that you're sitting right here next to us. So okay?
Yeah.
Just jump right in. And thanks for making sure I got reconnected with Miss Marie. She is sitting right here next to me, and I don't.
That's my girl.
That's your girl. And so for listeners who have been, for the many thousands of listeners who have been following the show every week. You may remember Ismarie. I think you came on our second show, I believe it was.
Did I?
The second show that I hosted. And as some of you may remember, Ismarie had an extremely powerful and emotional story to tell, as she, unfortunately, is one of the people that has been directly touched by the opiate epidemic and lost her husband. And she very bravely came on, pretty soon after that tragic event, and came on and talked very openly about her husband John and his experience in recovery and the tragic loss of his life. And I've really never forgot that show and your courage, and I'm glad that you're here. So as far as I'm concerned, you're part of the solution now, and you're part of this show as often as you want to be.
Thank you.
Thanks. And you're gonna have a and you're gonna have a your own perspective on things. So again, just get comfortable jumping right in there. You don't have to raise your hand. No, okay. So we also have some other people in the studio. Last week, if you remember, we had Teresa Spencer, who is now officially she's come twice, or she's not 3 times, so she's actually officially a co-host now. Well, the first time you couldn't speak, but but so we'll count it at least twice. And we had Adam from Musical Intervention on, and we had a great back and forth last week. And I actually had the pleasure. I was just telling Teresa before we got on the air that I had the pleasure to go down to New Haven and go to Musical Intervention, the storefront, the headquarters, as Adam calls it, and watch some of the talented musicians at the open mic night on Thursdays. And I can't recommend enough. This is a great experience. They ask for a $5 donation, which is really nothing, and you get to sit there and watch and listen to some really talented musicians. I mean, I was only there once, but I was quite amazed at the level of talent that was there, and I really just genuinely enjoyed myself, and the atmosphere there was just so great, just what you'd imagine. It's just loose, funny, and Adam's all over the place, and they obviously know and love him, and it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. He's such good people.
Yeah, and I'm going to try hard to get Adam to come down to my practice and work some of his magic with some of my clients in the groups that we have.
And we're gonna have him come to the CARES group as well.
Great. Yep. So this is why I call it open source recovery, because it's just this kind of special thing that happens when we start interacting with each other and networking and learning about what people are doing to combat this epidemic.
I think it's important too. It's not just why we focus a lot on opiate addiction. There's so many other addictions and things that we recover from, trauma and abuse, and, recovery doesn't necessarily just mean, opiates. And not only that, the things we talk about on the show, could be used just to enhance your life, even if you yourself aren't, struggling with an addiction. I mean, the musical interventions transform so many lives, and that could be for anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, obviously we do tend, because I focus on opiate addiction, I tend to focus on that, and because it's so all consuming in the news because of the death rate associated with it. But obviously we're here to talk about addiction in general as well, and I think that I think places like Musical Intervention that are just available for anyone in recovery are just a vital resource out there, and I can say, I have no doubt some of the people who are regulars there, regularly participate in that program have probably that's been like a rope that's been thrown to them. Mm-hmm. I know that without knowing it, So
definitely.
Yeah, and so so you mentioned trauma too. I do want to quickly touch on that, because so many of my clients, especially my female clients, really have a lot of trauma associated with their addiction, and I definitely have some men too who have some really difficult histories and have a lot of trauma, and so we're trying to do more to address that in my practice. We're right now. I have worked very closely with an organization called Connections, and they are doing a form of trauma therapy that is non-talk therapy. It is somewhat similar to EMDR, which Teresa. Our Teresa Spencer does and is doing, and she's going to do that for clients at my practice at their request, which is very exciting. And we're just trying very hard to find ways to help people who have trauma, because without that, it's very tough to maintain long-term recovery unless you get at the driving force that can be that can be trauma. So it's always tricky in addiction to treat trauma head on in some ways, because it's triggering to try and desensitize through talk therapy, which really should be done, only in my opinion, by someone who's has got specialized training in trauma therapy.
I just want to
go ahead.
expand
please.
on that if you don't mind.
No, please.
We talk about addiction and we talk about recovery, but I think we're really talking about healing. And the more time I spend in therapy, the more I understand it's about healing. Like
I agree.
Right? Aren't you in a process of healing now?
110%.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's developing the right coping skills. I know one of the things with John was he never learned to cope with what happened with him, and he took that into his past became his present, and it ended his future because he didn't know how to cope with certain things that happened to him. And it is about healing. It's about just letting it go.
Yeah, unfortunately, John's story really kind of illustrates how trauma, with unresolved trauma it's along for the ride.
And I think one of the strongest thing about addiction is how it's silent. You know what I'm saying? Like, John never wanted to talk about it. He never wanted to talk about what happened to him. And I know a lot of people that don't want to talk, and I think that's one of the biggest holds addiction has on someone. It's the silence that it comes to it. And it takes like people like me and you and people like me and him to really break that silence and be like, it's okay. Let's talk about it. It's okay. Let's figure out how we're going to work through this.
Right, and it's not just talking about the addiction. It's talking about, the pain underneath the addiction.
Yeah, definitely. Like, what bothers you? Like, John, sometimes he felt like because he was an addict, he wasn't allowed to feel certain things, or he wasn't allowed. How do I say this? He wasn't allowed to go through emotions that not normal, because really what is normal, but like the regular person went through. And when he would talk about it, he would kind of hold his head down like if he was ashamed, but there's nothing to be ashamed about.
Not at all.
You struggle like everyone else. It really doesn't make you any different. It makes you unique, and it makes your fight a little bit stronger. But no, he would look at me like if he was beneath me sometimes, and that's not true.
Yeah.
Not at all.
It's that core conditioning that someone is fighting against their whole life, and to get through that and get past that, or to learn how to not respond to it in some ways is really definitely
you know what I think
recovery.
plays a huge part. I'm a part of a lot of different groups on online and actually in person, but they're support groups, right? Because I was told I was supposed to join it was good for me to join a support group. But one of the things that and I'm not judging anybody. I really don't have an opinion. I just have mine and John's story. It's just they care so much of what their family members think. You just don't know it. I was talking to someone and she was like, oh my God, my son did this, my son did that, and how am I going to go to work? I'm so embarrassed. So I understand the feeling, because John he's never embarrassed me, because I wasn't afraid to tell his story, but he's embarrassed himself. And there were times where he'll be like, oh my God, I must be embarrassing her. I'm not good enough for her because I embarrass myself, which embarrasses her. But whenever I couldn't act like it didn't happen. Whenever I introduced John, it would be like, yeah, this is John. He's a person. And then he'll be like, oh, so how is everything? And I'm like, yeah, he comes from a dark past, but he works through it every single day. I think as part, speaking in a wife who dealt with addiction for more than 4 years with my husband, it was about not necessarily not caring, but really not caring about what other people thought. I mean, I think that's a weight that can really drag you down if you really, really care about what somebody else thinks about you.
Right, and that's the stigma associated with addiction.
Of course.
And that we are fighting that just having this radio show.
Absolutely.
And within the community, the more we network, the more we talk, the more that we link arms together and go out there and have these discussions, we bring down those barriers, because it is pervasive, right? It is all over the state of Connecticut. In fact, Teresa Conroy is here. Can I introduce her?
Oh, yeah, I was going to get to that, but please do. Yeah.
Teresa is a 3-time state representative, and I did my internship with her in the state capitol, probably the best year of my life spent learning so much. And we were a heck of a team, and I hope one day we can work together again. But in speaking about, the opioid crisis in Connecticut and what we're doing and stigma, there are people out there working to try to diminish stigma from the top down and to try to put legislation in place to help us all out. So I don't know if you can just kind of catch us up and give a little, thumbnail of your background and kind of bring us up to date where things are on the state level.
Sure. Thank you, Teresa. And Mark, it kind of gave me a little pang when you said our Teresa and you talked about Teresa Spencer because at one time she was my Teresa.
We stole her.
That's all right. That's all right. As long as she's doing this good work.
She is.
I was a former state representative, and I'm also an APRN. I retired from the VA hospital over in West Haven over 10 years ago. And when I was up in Hartford, about 6 years ago or so, I started hearing about the heroin epidemic. And I went to my leadership in Hartford, and I said, what are we doing in Connecticut about this heroin epidemic? And they all looked at me, and they said, what are you talking about, Conroy? And at that moment, I got chills up and down my arm, and I said, I'm going to have to take a lead in this.
And you really did.
And I did. And I have to tell you, every day I still learn something. I was instrumental in passing a lot of the legislation where we're using the prescription drug monitoring program for providers, doing the Narcan, getting it into the pharmacies without, where they can prescribe, getting into the hands of the first responders. Those are just some of the things. I was on a work group this past year where we just had legislation passed this current session to limit the amount of narcotics for pediatric patients. So it's a 5-day limit. There's always caveats out there. If someone needs it for a longer time, that's taken into consideration, and they're able to get that. But we want to make sure that we're not doing the overprescribing like it has been.
And that's working because clients tell me all the time about the drastic difference in availability for prescription medications. The market, illicit market for that is much more difficult for people to go out there and just buy prescription drugs on the streets.
Right.
I mean, unfortunately, there's this overlapping period where people who were using that have then had to, switched over to heroin in desperation.
Right.
So there's a sort of unintended effect, but there's no real way around that, I think. But the fact remains, there was not too long ago a lot of availability of prescription pain pills on the streets, and while I'm sure they're still there in pockets here and there, my clients routinely tell me that is very different than it was, not that long ago.
And that's good to hear because, when we did that legislation, I actually said to my colleagues up in Hartford, don't be surprised if we're going to have more deaths because they're not going to be able to get the prescription narcotics on the street. They'll be turning to heroin.
Yeah.
And we have seen that.
Yeah. And I just want to take a moment to sort of, heap a little praise on Teresa's direction because she really did take a leadership role. This is not the first time that Teresa and I have met, and I saw her at many forums, and she took the time to literally come down to my practice and sit in the groups and see what we were doing there, which was, I was a little, I was humbled that she would be willing to do that, and to me that said that she's looking for best practices, and she wants to know what's out there that's working. And then your colleague, Sean Scanlon, also is a tireless champion of this. I saw him not too long ago on the green in Brantford, at an event on opiate epidemic, and he's still doing his good work too. And so, yeah, I really, it's really great that you did take that role and that you did recognize it, and you were dead on in your assessment of the problem.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're continuing to do more work. I'm on the Connecticut Alcohol and Drug Policy Council, as you know. There's more work being done through there, but it's not a simple solution.
Well, it's not, but in some ways I get frustrated because there is some simplicity to the solution in that, I think it's very hard to legislate high-quality treatment because my frustration is that there's been some great work done around, as you said, getting Narcan available, prescription practices. There's a lot of prevention. That's a lot of prevention kind of stuff, which is all great and effective. But what hasn't happened, and it is legislation around the quality of care that's provided.
Yeah, what happens when it already happens? like when they're already addicted.
Amen.
yeah, because the focus
that
is,
wouldn't apply to me because John was
Right.
already addicted.
Right.
So, where do we turn to then?
I think it's harder to legislate quality treatment, and I think that those other things are not that they're easy things to legislate, but they're more concrete. And we have best practices.
Aren't these places getting audited though? Aren't there people checking?
No, I'll tell you why now. I'll give you a perfect example. So at my practice, we have therapy and medication combined, and in the true sense of the word, that's the standard of care for. If you look at the SAMHSA, the TIP protocols on how to do this kind of
what
treatment.
kind of medication, like Suboxone?
So, yes, Suboxone, but it's not just Suboxone, right? There's a doctor 20 feet away prescribing it, and then there's a therapist, and after every group, the doctor and I sit and talk. After every client, before the day's over, we talk about every client. We'll sometimes sit down, the three of us, the client, the physician, and myself. I mean, it's truly integrated care, right? And so that there's no law that says you have to do it that way. That's the standard. That's maybe in a lawsuit, someone could be held up to that standard of, if for malpractice kind of deal. But there's a lot of more than not the prescribers who are prescribing this Suboxone are doing it without an integrated therapy component. Now that, in my opinion, should not be happening. Mm-hmm. And the prescribers will do things like give a 30-day supply of Suboxone. That should not be happening. So there's a lot of things.
Yeah, John got a 30-day supply like nothing.
Right.
When he was on it, like literally, like I think he went in there and he was like, I'm a heroin user, and I want to get off. And the guy was like, okay.
Yep, here's a 5 minutes of my time, and I'll see you next month.
Yeah.
There's no literature that supports that practice. None, okay? So as someone who provides treatment...
that's the norm.
That's the norm, unfortunately. So, as someone who provides treatment, I do get frustrated because I'm looking for Connecticut to take a targeted approach to how are we going to serve all the clients, all the people out there who are already addicted, and how are we going to provide high quality care? Because unfortunately, you do have to sometimes legislate things because it's easy to make money if you have 100. Now it's 275, I believe, something like that. If you have that many persons coming to your practice and you're just writing scripts and handing them out, and you can treat a lot of people in that time and you can make a lot of money. But those individuals are not getting, all they're getting is medication. And we fall into a kind of a harm reduction process with that. But that's not the standard of care for addiction treatment is harm reduction. I mean, it has its place at times, but in my practice, as I think both Teresa's would hopefully back me up on this, we're in a recovery focused mode, and we believe in recovery from addiction, including opiate addiction, despite its difficulties. And it's really not what we do. It's not a new technology. It's very simple in terms of the model. It's very simple. So in that sense, sometimes I get frustrated because if we could replicate, if everyone took a similar approach to the way my practice is run, I know that we would make a nice dent in the opiate epidemic, and people would be getting well, and there would be less deaths. I've been doing this for 7 years now. I'm knock on wood, have not had a single client die yet. I've only had maybe 4 clients in the emergency room for overdose in 7 years. So we're doing something right. And it's not about me or my practice. It's about my model that is a standard of care, model that meets the standard of care, and that should be everywhere. That should be all treatment should be that way.
And I think that's something we need more of, is more of the evidence-based medicine out there, showing us that we can bring back to the legislature and say, this is what we need to do. This is how it's going to, you're talking about the standard of care. I know your program. Your program is a great program. But I think up in Hartford, people want to see hard numbers to see what the outcomes are going to be before they can invest into making legislation like that.
Yeah, Teresa.
Look at hard numbers are here. Look at the people dying.
Well,
how do you get numbers without funds?
Well, the numbers I'm looking for is when you're having people in treatment And you can say, I've had 100 patients. This is the way we're doing it with Suboxone, with,
But those numbers could be skewed very easily.
Well, I don't know if,
Well, no, Jackie's not talking about my practice. She's talking in general. But if someone were to provide those numbers, I could provide those numbers easily. And those numbers, someone wanted to look into those numbers to verify them, they certainly could. When a new client sits in group, they are always, routinely this happens, they're sort of little slack-jawed when they go around the room and are introduced to the rest of the group, who all have extensive sober time. You have a group of 8 people, and the average person in there has been sober for 9-10 months. And
how old are these people?
Well, we served, the youngest client I've ever had in my practice is 17. The oldest client I've had is in their early 70s. But the average age is probably in the late 30s to early 40s, I would say. But it's quite a variety of ages, yeah.
I just want to jump in if it's okay. When Teresa's talking about, outcomes and you're talking about legislating, best practice. There are people out there, and they are present on the Drug and Alcohol Council, who are promoting best practice, which is medication-assisted therapy.
Right.
And that is being implemented in a lot of the state-funded centers for care for dealing with behavioral health and addiction. So there is a movement. It's not your model per se, but that idea of let's not just give out a medication. Let's also do it correctly is out there, and it's becoming more discussed at the capital level and in the alcohol and drug policy. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I would love to either hear or be a part of that discussion, because I've been longing for that. I was at a roundtable discussion with Senator Murphy, who I have great respect for, and people were sharing their thoughts, and I shared my concern that we're not focusing enough on treatment as much as we are on some of the prevention, which is wonderful and I support. And Senator Murphy, I think sort of his statement to me sort of reflected, I think, some of the thinking about investing in treatment. And he said, well, if treatment is working so well, why are so many people dying? And, I think that people don't believe that treatment is working or can work, and so they want to put their resources in other places. Oh yeah, we have a call, but I know it can work. Who do we have on the line?
Hi, Dr. Bono. It's Sarah.
Oh, hello, Sarah.
Hi.
Thanks for calling in. So we I don't know if you've been listening, Sarah, but we were talking about good treatment and what the model looks like for good care. And Sarah has kindly offered to call in and talk about her experience getting treatment with the model that I've been discussing. Right, Sarah?
Yes.
All right. So were you actually listening? Were you listening before you called in?
I was listening to a little bit. I only got about 5 minutes in.
Okay.
But yeah.
So I think actually Sarah's is in a unique position to really talk about that because of her battles with addiction, and prior to coming to get help at CCR. Do you? I'm going to leave it up to you, Sarah. Obviously, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want whatever you feel comfortable talking about. But the topic we're on right now, like I said, is what represents quality care and what works.
Yeah, I definitely agree that Suboxone with therapy maintenance has been the best choice that I've personally taken. I have been on a 12-year journey through this addiction process, and I have tried rehab and countless different outlets, and Suboxone with combination of therapy and group therapy has done basically a lifesaver for me.
Sarah is very inspirational. She really is. It's been about a year, Sarah? A little bit,
yes.
just over a year.
Yep.
And I've watched
just
her.
over a year.
I've watched this young woman like transform her life. Really, like it's unrecognizable to when she first came to get help. And the beautiful thing about it is that Sarah, if you don't mind me saying about, Sarah is giving this gift not to herself, just to herself, but to her beautiful children as well. So she's saving her life, and she's really giving the gift of motherhood back to her children. And it's really been inspirational to watch her in 1 year get a job, get her own apartment, to completely reconnect with her children, do extremely well at her job, get a year sober, it's just been, and grow personally on so many levels, because Sarah is in therapy with me, so I get to see all the growth. And there's a lot I won't go into specifics, but there's been a lot of growth. And we're going to be moving towards the time when Sarah's not on Suboxone. And I think that's important that everyone out there hears that we're not trying to keep people on Suboxone. It's a tool in early recovery. And Sarah, you've decreased your level of Suboxone, correct?
Yes, I started the program a year ago on 12 milligrams, and I'm now down to 1.75 milligrams.
1.75, yeah. And if any of you know that's quite an accomplishment to go.
Yeah,
that
is.
It is. And there's been no, not even a single slip up, which is amazing considering where you came from. And really, Sarah, would you agree? Like, it's not been a complex thing. You got good treatment from the doctor, you got therapy, and we treated you like the quality person that you are, and that's it. There's no magic, it's not. It's right. We don't have like a secret.
But I think she was ready, right?
And of course
she was ready, because I know John went through so many rehabs and so many detoxes, and he just, he said he wanted to change, but the addiction caused more. And it wasn't until the last one that he actually took serious, and he actually went to all the groups, and he was involved.
Right.
He was ready to change. He wanted to change.
I will say though, and Sarah, I don't know if you've had this experience. There are people who could be ready or are ready, but sometimes the system, the services that they're getting aren't geared for success. Yeah,
I agree.
And detox is one of my pet peeves, right? Because in some ways, they're really the way detox is done is it's really, first of all, it's not detox, right? If you go into detox for opiate addiction, and they use methadone or Suboxone, and you're in there for 5-6 days maybe, and you're out the door, and all they've done is giving you some longer
something
term,
to help you cope.
It's a longer term, it's a longer acting opiate, and it stabilizes you a bit for that 5 or 6 days. Then you leave, and 2 days later you're back in withdrawal. And if there hasn't been a handoff to maintenance treatment, outpatient treatment at least, then that was just a waste, and it's about a 98% failure rate in terms of staying sober.
I think fundamentally, there is no such thing as just a detox, right? You have to. Their recovery is a lifelong process, and interestingly enough, Teresa today is actually working on getting her nephew into rehab, and that's where we need to join forces, do our networking, and create a sober community, which you had Donna and Matt DeLuca on September 11th on this show. And Teresa contacted me and let me know that she was struggling to get her nephew taken care of, and that she was at work and trying to negotiate this. And I just got a hold of Donna and Matt, and they got a hold of her, and then they're talking to her sister or brother, I don't know which. And so he also has had prior experiences.
Yeah, and just, to tell a little bit background on this story, my nephew, he's in his 20s, and he's been a heroin addict maybe for, maybe 3 or 4 years now that we know of. And the first time that it was brought to our attention, he was right away sent down to Florida, went through a program, came back, and very shortly thereafter was using again. Again, he went up to another program in Connecticut, and he came out and was unsuccessful again. He's tried Suboxone in the past, and he knows how to work the Suboxone. Like, you learn how to titrate things for yourself. And it was on my own way to work this morning. And now you have to remember, I'm a nurse practitioner. I sit on the Alcohol and Drug Policy Council in the state. I know a lot about this epidemic. But when it hits home, you have no place to go.
Right.
I agree.
And this is somebody, like I said, I'm an expert in this area. And the first thing I did was text Teresa. Right. And it's like, who do I turn to? Because he was ready, and what he said to his parents was, I've tried Suboxone, I've tried other things. I think I want to do methadone this time. So,
oh boy.
Well, so
I think they're kind of looking for that saving grace. John always kind of looked for it. John was always like, well, I got this friend and he was clean for this long and he did this. So I'm going to try this and this is going to get me better. And this time I'm going to do it.
Yeah, so someone says I tried Suboxone. No, obviously no offense to your nephew, but so they if they didn't try Suboxone with everything that we described wrapped around it, then they didn't have a fair chance at really benefiting from Suboxone.
Exactly. And when, my brother, I talked to him and he's frantic because, they call a methadone clinic and they won't even see him till Wednesday because he has Suboxone in his system. Right. And the families don't understand the whole complications between the Suboxone and the methadone. So it was very frustrating, but I do have to say, Donna and Matt were great today. They contacted them right away, and they've been meeting with them. So hopefully, like you say, it's not a one-time, I want to get cured, here I am. It's just like when you quit smoking. We keep telling people, quit smoking. And the more you tell them, how many times can we relapse? We have all these other, you have Nicoderm patches, you have Nicoderm gum, you have whatever, Shantex. It's like that when we're talking about the opioid addiction. It's just not one treatment modality out there, but it's the right treatment modality for the person, what they need.
Right. There are many pathways to recovery.
Of course there are.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
You basically just summed up my whole treatment when you were talking about how he went to Florida. I did the Florida thing. I did the rehab, the
John
detox in Florida. I was sent up here to Connecticut, did a detox relapse right after that. Tried the methadone. Methadone is, in my opinion, is more addicting or just as addicting as heroin.
Yeah, John said that too.
Yeah, and it's actually just another escape route when you're coming off of heroin because you can still get high when you're on methadone. So Suboxone is so much better combined with treatment because I tried Suboxone as well on my own because it's so easy to get off the street and it's so easy,
that never works. Yeah, that never works.
Yeah,
it
never works. But combined with
yourself.
the right people and the right program and the right
it's all the difference
sources.
In the world.
Because I kind of think they just don't really kind of understand. John never understood that. John kind of thought that drugs were his problem. Right. So as soon as he got the drugs out of his system, he wouldn't have a problem anymore.
That's right.
But the problem wasn't the drugs. The problem was why he used the drugs.
Right.
That was his biggest problem.
And you just summed up why therapy is so critical.
Exactly. This is coming from a guy who, when I met him, he was like, I'll never go to a therapist. I hate therapists. Right. They don't understand me. They won't ever, relate to me. So when he was actually ready and he was like, I need to talk about it. I need to talk about it because the more I don't talk about it, the more I want to do drugs so I can escape it.
Exactly.
Yeah, his insight increased and his readiness changed. And sometimes it is that timing issue. I just, Teresa Conroy, I'm a little mad at you. Why did you not bring your nephew to see me?
It was the distance issue. That's what the issue is.
It's worth the drive, trust me.
Yeah, I drive almost an hour and a half every week to see Dr. Bono.
Thanks, Sarah.
Amazing.
There you
changed
go.
my life.
And I think that's what the difference was today, too. My sister-in-law said to me, I think all these other times it was I wanted him to be treated. It was more coming from me pushing him to get the treatment.
Yeah, I've been there
now
too.
it's him saying, I don't want to live my life like this anymore. So, you know,
That's good.
we get the right connections and
Change
say
is
a lot of
coming.
prayers.
Change is coming.
It's the right place to start. That's the moment to grab onto.
Yeah, because if you force them, it just doesn't work. I've been there where I'm like, John, you can't do this anymore. We're going to take you. You're going to do this and you're going to do this. And he's like, fine. And he'll go in there and then he'll leave 5 days later and go right back to it. He's like, I did what you wanted me to do. I'm like, you know what I mean like that, John.
Yep.
And I just want to stress, even really good programs. There's some really good residential programs out there, right? Even those programs, if it's not set up so that there's a really strong, transition plan, and it's not part of a continuum, the good quality care doesn't translate into sustained recovery, and that's not because the treatment wasn't good. That's because the process wasn't good. I have a client right now who was in a really good program in South Carolina, and then they came back to Connecticut and now are participating in the AWARE recovery program. And because the intensity of the AWARE wraparound service recovery program, she is succeeding, but she acknowledges that without that level of intensity, the transition would have been
I agree.
too hard.
110%.
Exactly. And there has to be, at a minimum of a year, intense support at a minimum.
Yeah,
Like,
I think Jackie said like 18 months till she started to get a hold of things.
Right.
Exactly.
Like John went to a great program. You're going to get out of the program what you give into it. And, the John's last program, it was absolutely great. They did the detox first. He went, I think he lived there for like 2 months and he was like, okay, I'm ready. And, I think he had to battle between... He didn't understand, and I wish he would have a little bit. Like, if I could talk to him again, I would tell him, if I could go back, I'd tell him that it's a lifestyle change.
Right.
So he was trying to juggle being married and having my life and changing his. And it was such a hard thing. So when he was in rehab, he was like, okay, I'm done. I got the drugs out of my system. I want to go back and be a husband now. And it was like, well, it just kind of doesn't work that way, John. You need to try, continue on with your program. We were really trying to get a year. And so he went into like sober living, but his sober living was more of a like, you're yourself. You know what I'm saying? Like, we provide you the environment, but it's the tools that you're going to use to get on your own. So, by himself, he got a job and he was working. He was great. He was sober. I think it was that and the combination of the freedom, like there wasn't somebody, it's not easy being sober in a controlled environment, but it's easier than being sober in an environment where you used to get high.
Oh, it's
right.
It's totally.
So he went from people holding his hand the whole time and him like letting go of that hand and being like, okay, I'm free, to now coming in, quote unquote, the real world. And I guess one day it just got to him. He didn't continue on with the Vivitrol, and I think that's a great option.
Yep.
And something you don't have to think about every day. And, he slipped, and unfortunately that one slip ended his life.
You just really described the sort of the bubble kind of issue around coming out of a controlled environment. And that's why, I'm just such a strong proponent of looking at not looking at each part of the continuum, not in a silo, but as a part of of an actual continuum, and that we have to do a better job at ensuring that there is a true continuum.
That's why, I keep talking about a recovery community. We need to make and that's, people like Adam. We need to create sober resources and sober, activities and networked communities so that you not only just work a program, but you have access to new connections that are sober in your new life.
Yeah.
You can't come back
sober
out to
connections.
Exactly. We need to create a sober community around each individual, and that is the work of what we need to do. And even at a legislative level, and there has been discussion around that within the context of the Alcohol and Drug Policy Council of creating these longer, thinking more a year, not just thinking detox 10 days and you're done. That there is no such thing as that.
No, and my thought is not to be, so repetitive about the detox thing, but my thought is that if someone has an opiate addiction and they're going into detox, they are not they are in need of treatment, not detox, right? So they're going to need 18, 20 months of treatment. So when you are when you need treatment and you're physically dependent on opiates, you need to be on a maintenance medication. And so what is the purpose of going into detox if you should be doing an induction onto, I much prefer Suboxone, but it's onto a longer, a long-lasting opiate that's used for treatment. What I don't see what the purpose of going into detox serves other than as a sort of time out away from the environment that you're in. But clients who come to my practice could easily elect to go to detox, but they come and they do an induction and they're off and running in their recovery. So it's not like we're missing something without the detox there. When you combine that with the fact that you can't detox in 5 or 7 days, then I just don't see why we keep sending people to detox. Other than we don't have any place else to send them at that moment, there isn't a program to get them started at that moment. So they go to detox, it buys you a few days. That's not a well-thought-out system of care. That's my concern.
Well, we do the same things that we do because we've always done them that way.
Right.
And that's part of, what the Alcohol and Drug Policy Council is trying to do, is to really look at, we need to rethink the system. I think that's pretty clear. And that what we've done before doesn't work.
This is a different. There is some significant differences between opiate addiction and other addictions, and the physical component.
Especially
of it,
now that we're adding things like fentanyl and carfentanil.
Right.
Yeah,
the game has changed.
Well, that ratchets up the issue, but the issue is you have to design a system of care that takes into account the physical component of this addiction, and that is designed to succeed with that in mind. And a 5 or 7 day detox with Suboxone or methadone is not a well-designed approach to this addiction. But we have limited resources, right? And some of our resources are going into a process that we know has no chance of succeeding.
Well, that's why we need you, Dr. Bono, to document your outcomes and get them into a white paper so that it can be presented to the legislature. Because the legislature moves on published material. They're not going to do it on word of mouth. So I know I've talked to you about that before. Yeah. But then you having a model that works and you have the documented outcomes, then that's something that has, something that can gain some traction.
Well, I'm going to be actually working on, I don't know if it's not going to be a white paper per se, but I'm going to be working on sort of putting the model together, writing it up, and writing up some of the results, because I have a presentation to do for it at a conference on the opiate epidemic through the Connections is sponsoring on the 23rd and 24th. I'm trying to remember where, Wesleyan University this month. So that hopefully will get me going. And then, of course, you'll be at my practice to nag me about that, Teresa.
Absolutely. Because what you do is awesome, and more people need to do it, but they also need to hear about it and know that you're doing it. And you also need to be able to expand. So part of that is, putting it together in a coherent way that you can that you can present it even to the Alcohol and Drug Policy Council.
Yeah, that sounds like a welcome opportunity if that we were able to do something like that. Because, like I said, what's frustrating to me is it's very simple what we're doing. It's not necessarily simple to do well, but it's not a complex.
It also goes back to what we were talking about last week, even, and it's really about human connectedness, right? Nobody gets sober by themselves. You know, it really is about the human connection. It's about being cared about, which is, again, human connectedness, and having someone be genuinely interested in your welfare and well-being, which you've demonstrated. And I'm sure Sarah would say that that connection is there with you and with everyone in your practice, because it starts at the front door, right?
Right.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they need people that care about them.
Absolutely. To treat them with dignity and respect.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're not just another number that walks into the door. You have a name.
And honestly, Sarah, that's the universal thing that I've gotten as far as feedback from clients that has differentiated their experience at CCR, and they may or may not fully appreciate some of the nuances of some of the technical stuff that's going on in terms of my capacity to address mental health stuff or diagnose it, or the physician's ability to, prescribe Suboxone in a very therapeutic and effective way. But what they do, what my clients do seem to gravitate towards is exactly what Sarah just said, is that they feel like they're understood and appreciated as an individual, and that seems to be not the common experience in places that they've been in the past.
Teresa wanted to say something.
No, I was just going to bring up, I think I get frustrated also when, Mark was saying about the standard of care. And I have a medical background and not a psych background. And when I look at it, I always relate it to like heart disease. And where we're at right now with heart disease is where we should be at. Where we're at with the addictions is still in the dark ages. I say that to people when I go out and talk, and I know Senator Murphy, took this on, was if I had a heart attack right now, and the ambulance is going to come, they're going to give me some nitro, they're going to bring me to the hospital, I'm going to be evaluated, I'm either going to go, have all the workup, might have stents put in, or go to the cardiac cath lab, or might have open heart surgery. From there, I'm going to go into rehab, I get discharged, then I have cardiac rehab where I'm going to get healthier. Now, if somebody has an overdose, they might get the Narcan, might go to the ER, and then they're going to be sent on their way.
They give you a referral to their local detox and send you right out.
And when you look at this, the mortality, I can't say specifically, but it's probably, I'm thinking, higher these days for the overdoses than it is for heart attacks.
Right.
And I don't think the average public person out there understands this. This is still a medical problem, and that's how we have to address it. We need to go, if I had the chest pains, I'd be getting nitroglycerin.
Right.
When I have an overdose, I'm getting the Narcan.
Right.
And then we have to go on, yes, it is more complicated because we're talking about the mind here.
Right.
And it's not as easy as looking into a heart and saying, oh, you have clogged valve.
But there are protocols that doctors must follow, and there are established protocols that are based on best practices for when you have a heart attack. And all those things exist out there in terms of how we're doing addiction treatment. We know what to do.
Right.
We're just not doing it, not routinely.
There's no continuum.
Well, that's part of it. And even within a particular modality of treatment, we're not meeting those standard practices. We shouldn't prescribe Suboxone without therapy. We know this. And there's all kinds of literature to support that. So that's where it's different between the standard of how we're as a society we're holding ourselves up to that standard with addiction versus other health issues. It's not even close.
I think I just want to jump in here because I think this is a really important point to make. Is when you're talking about it being an issue of the mind, addiction is a disease of the brain. It is a physiologic disorder of the brain.
Our world doesn't see it that way.
It is, and this is where we need to change it. It is not a character flaw. It is not a character flaw. It is not about a person's character, and that's where we've gotten sidelined as a society, thinking that why don't you just stop it? Why don't you just get better? Why don't you just?
Why can't you just stop?
Why can't you just stop? It's not that. Once you become physiologically addicted to a substance, it is all biochemical and physiological, and that's something that the public doesn't understand, that it's not a decision that someone's making.
Yeah. The fact that we are still, so if you had a heart attack, Teresa, I don't want to keep giving you a heart attack, but if you 50 years from now, if you had a heart attack, and they gave you medication to treat that heart attack that was the standard of care in 1979, and it didn't work, you would have, they'd be in a lot of trouble, right?
Right.
So, when we prescribe methadone to people, we are using medication that was developed in the 70s and hasn't changed. But we have this newer medication called Suboxone, and it was developed because it has many clinical advantages to methadone. And it was really not really disputable. Not only the medication is more effective and safer, it is provided in a setting that has been demonstrated to be more effective. And so, what other medical issue would we we allow ourselves to continue to use old technology and old approaches. We just wouldn't. And there's this disparity between addiction treatment and other health-related issues, and yet addiction, the mortality rate, as you mentioned. I mean, there was this tragedy, right, this morning. Everyone heard 59 people are now have died from this horrible, horrific thing that happened. But 46 people a day die from heroin overdose. No, they're not all collected.
And that is the kind of thing that we need to tell everyone.
Yeah, and
because it's not mainstream. I think that the society has kind of gotten like desensitized to it, because I see it now, and I tell you, it breaks my heart for people that I don't even know, and it truly breaks my heart. But then I know, like, I see other people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, another one died." I'm like, no, it should affect you a little bit more than that, because that person could be your nephew.
But some of my clients really talked about this, being desensitized. Sure. I've literally had incredible things happen where a client came in and said, 3 of my friends died this weekend. 3.
Yeah.
I've counted since John died, and John died on July 10th. I've counted 4 a day since John died that I know of. 4 a day. Of people I know.
That you know?
That I know. 4 a day.
Jeez.
Since John diid.
I mean,
and those are the kinds of numbers that I think that the state should really take a look at. And how do we account for those people? You know, these are not just regular, like, random, like, I always, like, I kind of had, before I met John, I had, like, the movie perception of what an addict was, right?
Right.
So the guy who was sitting on the side of a street with broken, ugly clothes, and he would steal and do anything for money. It wasn't until I met my husband that he was the most gorgeous man I've ever seen in my whole life, and he was kind and he was friendly, but he did have this problem that I realized, oh my God, this could happen to me. This could happen to my niece. This could happen to my nephews. Like, this could happen to anybody, and what are we going to do to stop it?
Yeah, and when you come to my, if you were, and actually I want to ask you to come to my practice at some point and talk about, you know, what you've been through, and if you sit in the room, you know, Sarah can back me up on this. There's good people in that room.
There's great people.
I've
been to meetings.
Yeah,
I would go with him. I would be like, let's just go together. You know, that would be our date night. Let's go to a meeting, right? So he didn't feel like he was so different. And we would go, and there would be doctors in there. There would be nurses in there. Like, these great people that just so happen to struggle with this.
It can happen to anyone. That's why the prescribing practice thing is really important too. But, you know, I can tell you that, you know, I would be proud to call any of my clients my friend, and
that's a beautiful thing.
And it's true. And there's no like Sarah, there's no kind of person in our practice, right?
No,
it's
no, not at all.
Right?
We're all the same. We're all the same.
well, you all have something in common, but there's nothing that defines what, you know, the average heroin addict or opiate addict looks like in our practice. You can't look around the room and be like, oh, this is what opiate addicts look like. They're just a group of people, you know, and they're great people, Sarah included. So it is all this is reason we need to keep fighting, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, really quick, I think that recovery is a beautiful thing. I think that it's a very hard thing. And, you know, a lot of the times my husband would be like, you know, and I would ask him, like, how'd you start drugs? Like, what was you, like, you knew it was bad, right? Because everybody tells you, your parents tell you drugs are bad. And I was like, how did it, you know, especially coming from him, both his parents were in drugs. You know, his mom overdosed off of drugs, and he never got to meet, like, really spend time with his biological mother. And he would say, well, we were at a party, and you only live once. And it wasn't until, I swear, it's this whole healing process for me that I realized, that I got this from a song, actually, that you only live once. I think that's complete, like, bullshit. Seriously. First of all, I believe that you die twice. The first time is when we put you in the grave, and the second time is the last time that somebody's going to ever talk about you, right? John would have only died once. And the second time, I believe that you live every single day that you are in recovery. Every day that you wake up and you choose, I'm going to recover today and I'm not going to use, and just for today, you're living that day. Mm-hmm. I can count the days that John lived, and I can count the days that John didn't live.
We are running out of time. I really want to thank you. Thanks for calling in, Sarah. I really appreciate it. And you are an inspiration to the group and to me. And thank you for being part of the show today. I really appreciate it.
And I thank you too, because without your practice, I wouldn't be where I am today either.
Thank you for saying that, Sarah. And obviously, thank you to my co-hosts and to my special guest, Teresa Conroy, for coming. And there's a lot of wisdom in the room, so I appreciate everyone. And I look forward to continuing this process. And I just want to say good night, Sullivan, and good night, Thea. I love you guys.
Right.
Thank you.
PPRN Radio.net. Featured guest DJs. Music news. The hottest DJs from around the world.
Okay. To the left.
I watched the needle take another